Alrighty, sorry about the delay. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Frageth, and today we're going to read some more from Destination Void by Frank Herbert. I believe it will be the penultimate installment, assuming nothing critical happens in the intervening hour or two. Oh, I've already got people writing me things. Good morning to you, Optical Antenna. Frag, could you touch up your thoughts on blind sight conclusion that you drew? Thanks. Touch up my thoughts on blind sight conclusion that I drew. How do you mean? Like what the state of affairs is at the end of the book? Um, Pretty sure at the end of the book it's Siri Keaton. Okay, so making certain assumptions without taking into account uh, some of what we may or may not have learned during echopraxia. Siri Keaton is basically floating in an escape pod at the end of Blind Sight, recording, and Blind Sight itself is basically a memoir. Him saying, "Hey, it turns out that consciousness isn't necessarily the great evolutionary advantage we thought it was. It turns out you can work, the other life in the universe can operate just fine without having a conscious present I am me um, type affair. And it doesn't like us very much. It thinks that basically our culture is a waste of time and, in fact, an attempted weaponry attack, a psyop as of sorts. And it's probably going to try and destroy us. Things get confusing though in echopraxia, and I've got to reread that book to see if I can really understand what's going on there. So my understanding of echopraxia is that it is entirely possible that the transmissions that are coming that claim to be Siri Keaton from an escape pod of Siri Keaton's isn't in fact Siri Keaton at all. It's actually either Rorschach or something else out there that's kind of hijacked him and can emulate him, emulate Siri Keaton. Um, that's at least broached as a possibility. We don't know how true that is exactly, and I'm also not entirely sure what is broadcasting the Portia mold space gunk to the Icarus station. I'm assuming that was Rorschach, um, the big alien space vessel-y thing, crown of thorns, what have you. Uh, so I guess I'd need you to elucidate on what your question is. Um, I'm not sure which conclusions those are, because I can't remember back 2 years, and I haven't listened to it in forever. In fact, I haven't listened to it. I should probably do that to see just how crazy I was sounding. Um, anyway, so previously on Destination Void. Previously on, what happened? So the biggie, probably the most interesting reveal beyond the technobabble, is that indeed they are carrying actual factual human beings, non-clones, um, in some of their hive tanks. Presumably, this includes seeds, livestock, other animals. I don't think this book ever really mentions why there's such a desperate push to get out into space. I think the implication is there's a impending disaster of some kind. It's kind of the only thing that can really justify why Moonbase, which is, and so much of this is like inference, because Frank Herbert's kind of great at that, where it's like he gives you kind of like hints of a framework that's going on, and you can kind of draw your own conclusions, but it's implied in this that basically there's been a global effort to send out space colonization. Um, and for whatever reason, it's also part of a push to develop artificial consciousness. Um, that's not really clear why they're doing that, that I know of in this book. I want to say one of the later volumes of the series, possibly the Ascension Factor, even as late as that, is a bit clearer on why exactly that's happening. Um, but suffice it to say, they got to go out into space. They got to send people in hibernation tanks. That's with a Y, not an I. Um, in order to do a colonization effort, and they got to use clones, and they got to create an artificial consciousness in space because it's safer than doing it on land. Because remember that island in the Puget Sound? It was bad. It was not good. It disappeared. There is no more island in the Puget Sound. Well, there might be other islands, but there is no more that specific island in the Puget Sound. At any rate, so we don't know why exactly this is going on, but we do know that there are, in fact, actual factual non-clones in hibernation tanks on the tin egg that our umbilicus crew that we've been introduced to, Prue, Timberlake, Bickle, and Flattery, and it's Prudence Wagand. I couldn't remember it last week or the week before. So they're all, they are in fact carrying real bodies along for the ride. I know there's something else that's relevant that happened. What is it? Give me a sec to flip. They are making progress on creating their cybernetic brain. Oh yes, the last dramatic event that happened, because the aux unit is plugged in to the AAT system, which is their, okay, someone's trying to send me lovely messages. Great. Oh, that's important. Give me a sec. Oh boy. I thought they weren't going to get to me till later, so if they're doing it earlier, that makes me concerned. Deal with that in a minute. Normally I wouldn't interrupt, but this one is possibly important. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that. So he's saying that he can't contact me until later, so it's quite convenient. So every time that they receive a signal from Moonbase, because they are somewhere in our solar system at this point, but they're traveling outwards. And the AAT system is designed to descramble what they're getting, basically by acting kind of as a large language model, and being like, oh, these are the most likely things that are probably being said, and then giving it to them. Now, the aux unit, this thing that's going to be kind of the starting point of their artificial consciousness, it's right now it's being purposed by Bickle and Co. to become part of a black box, white box system where they can, I think the intent is to use, they're basically going to bootstrap to artificial consciousness using the ship's computing systems and the aux, and they're going to see how things interact between the aux and the ship's computer systems, and that way they have a white box showing, okay, this is how the thing thinks, this is how we'll be able to tell it what to do, or at least attempt to program it to do things like not try and kill us instantly, um, and maybe ideally get it to love us and feel guilt and a few other things. So it's all part of that. How exactly they're going to get from point A to point B isn't super clear, but it kind of doesn't matter, I guess. Um, and uh, and right now they're receiving a message via the AAT master control system, which is now going to go through the aux circuits and therefore do things that they're not really going to be able to guess at just yet, because as far as I know, they don't have a way of tracking where it shoots things into the ship's programming, which is how they would know what it's doing and how it's making inferences. Okay, if that made very little sense to you, don't worry, you're not alone. A bunch of this book, I'm reasonably confident, is technobabble, but it sounds good, so it's cool. Kind of like an adversarial network. Kind of, actually. Yes, that is a pretty good comparison, assuming that's in reference to the AAT system. I know there was one other thing that happened here, but I can't remember what it was. Oh, right. Prue is doing more drugs. She's doing lots of drugs. She's basically going through the day high, because she's trying to figure out what chemicals can provide heightened consciousness passing through the blood-brain barrier. Um, and in so learning that, we'll be able to better help Bickle by being like, okay, this is how chemicals work. That will somehow help you with building an electronic brain. Um, I'm not totally sure that that would work, but we're going to make the assumption that it will. That's what she's doing. This also means she's off her anti-sex meds, which means she's like, instead of being like totally in control, she's I wouldn't say uncontrollably horny, but that's kind of part of it. Being a little blunt as to what's going on, but she's like, oh, okay, I'm the only woman in a bunch of dudes on a ship headed for probably we're all going to die, and they might be getting, also semi-randy. Not Bickle, because he's Bickle. he's he's not unaware of this stuff, but he's like eyes on the prize the entire time, to the point of you kind of want to throttle him. Bickle's kind of annoying. Bickle's actually very annoying. He's very aggravating, but he's frequently right, and he has a can-do attitude, or will-do attitude. Whether he can or can't, he's going to make something happen. Anyway, I think we get more insight this time into what flattery's all about. We do know that Flattery knows more about what's going on and what was going on via Moonbase than anyone else. Um, and unfortunately, that doesn't mean he's like totally aware of the plan, as it were. Like, oh, you know, they tell him, oh, yeah, you're very clever. You figured out that, this is kind of an exercise, if you will, a test. And there's not actually anything at Tau Ceti that you can colonize. But if you're successful, you'll be able to go wherever, you know. And he's like, oh, well, it turns out that maybe not. But now that, and he's like, oh, well, it's actually totally a test. And then he learns, oh, we actually have real people, non-clones. We'll get more into the politics of that later. We've already had a blurb from Hempstead that clones are property, period, end of story. And obviously, anybody who knows anything about, oh, I don't know, slavery knows that that's morally unacceptable. Um, don't worry, we're going to get into that. It's not going to be in this book, sadly, but we are going to get into that, I promise. That is going to be brought up again. It is going to be relevant. It is going to be discussed. Um, yeah, okay. I don't remember what else we did last week. It's been a long week. So Prue is good at math, but she's off balance. Timberlake is now basically on side with Bickle at this point. He's like, yeah, you know what, Bickle? Let's go. Let's do this thing. Let's get it done one way or another. Flattery's like, but what if it's God? This is a blasphemy. That is not good. What if we create a monster? And Bickle is like, what if we create a monster, but I gotta? And then Prue is like, Prue's doing Prue things. Prue is also trying to help. We're going to get a bit more insight on her, I think, and her thought process this time around, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. She has a bit more relevance. Wonder if moon transmissions to Moonbase are garbled? We have to assume they are. The last checkpoint we heard that they're at, in terms of our system, is they're somewhere along Saturn's orbit, so they're getting out there. They could be beyond that. I don't think they're outside of our solar system yet. They might be headed that way. They are certainly headed that way, but I don't think they've gone beyond, because they've had to be slower than they would like to because they no longer have their automated machinery working. In this case, literal brains in boxes in the form of the OMCs, the organic mental cores, which all failed catastrophically, basically right at the start of the mission, within a day. Moonbase is able to send transmissions to them in response to their queries, so perhaps they are better equipped to send messages accurately than Moonbase is, or maybe Moonbase has better infrastructure, broader reception dishes than they do. I'm not sure. That's a good question, though. A lot of this book is kind of flighty. There's a bunch of like, oh, not everything holds up totally, but let's just kind of pretend it does. And part of that's because it was definitely designed to be like a serialized thing in pulp magazines, and then kind of gets reverse engineered into a much thicker, a much more fleshed out novel. So it's parts of it are like, oh, okay, well, let's hand wave that for the moment and see where we go with this. But that's okay. You can't get a banger every time, and I still think there's quite a lot of at least entertainment to be had here, and some interesting ideas. So I'm for it. And plus, out of this, we get the Pandora sequence, and those are actually quite good. Um, I just recently got through a reread of The Lazarus Effect, and I was like, wow, I forgot how this book just kind of does stuff. Like you'll be going along, going along, going along. It's like, oh, okay, next dramatic plot point. Oh, wait, we just skipped over like something, didn't we? No, 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 no. That's how it is. They're like, yeah, no, we're to business now. We're getting stuff done. So stuff will happen like between chapters, and it's like, don't you think we should have seen that bit? But they're like, nah, we got a schedule to keep. Speaking of schedules to keep, I've yammered for a while now, so we're going to get cracking. Chapter 23. I feel the duties of a creator toward this artificial consciousness. It seems to me that my primary goal must be to render this creature happy, to provide it whatever joy I can, else this entire project seems pointless. There already are enough unhappy creatures in this universe. Raja Lawn Flattery. Private communion with the ox. It took several minutes for the incoming messages to search its for the incoming message singular. It took several minutes for the incoming message to search its way through the AAT and the aux accretions which Bickle had added to the system. They were tense minutes in Com Central. Flattery's gaze swept back and forth across the telltales of his board. There were big unknowns about the system now, and any input might elicit strange behavior from dangerous quarters. Behavior, Flattery thought, catching the word in his own mind. There were anthropomorphic assumptions in that word. Why should it play by our rules? In the shop, Bickle felt his own waiting tensions. Was the incoming message going to be more garbage? Prudence, standing near him, sensed the unwashed musks of his body, all the evidences of his concentration on their mutual problem. Now, I'm not sure if that's her thinking. There's italics, and it says, why not? He wants to live as much as I do. I'm going to assume that's her. Why not? He wants to live as much as I do. Bickle swept his gaze across the repeater telltales in the shop, watched the needles kick over and come to rest in the normal range. There came the characteristic sharp AAT hum, felt now in the shop because the aux was part of the circuitry. The sound raised a tingling sensation along Bickle's sides and arms. The gauges registered the usual AAT pause. The multiple bursts of the message were being sorted, compared, translated, and fed into the output net. Bickle glanced at the screen, saw that Flattery had the system on audio. Morgan Hempstead's voice began rolling from the vocoders. This is Project calling UMB ship Earthling. This is Project calling. We are unable to give an exact determination of the force that damaged the ship. We suggest an error in transmission or insufficient data. The possibility of an encounter with a neutrino field of theoretical type A-G is suggested by one analysis. Why have you failed to acknowledge our directive on return procedure? Bickle watched his gauges. The message was coming in with remarkable clarity, no garbling at all apparent now that it was routed through the aux circuits. Oh. No garbling at all apparent now that it was routed through the aux circuits. That's a little better. Means a bit different. Means something different. There came the distinct sound of Hempstead clearing his throat. It gave Prudence a peculiar feeling to hear this ordinary sound, a man clearing his throat. The inconsequential thing had been transmitted millions of miles to no effect other than to inform them Hempstead had been troubled by a bit of phlegm. Again, Hempstead's voice rolled from the vocoders. UMB is being subjected to heavy, repeat, heavy political pressures as regards the abort order. You will acknowledge this transmission immediately. The ship is to be returned to orbit around UMB while disposition is made of yourselves and cargo. That's an awful word, disposition, Prudence said. She glanced at Bickle. He seemed to be taking it calmly. Flattery could feel the heavy beating of his heart. He wondered if the next few words would bring that deadly kill ship code signal from Hempstead. Bickle stared at the vocoder with a puzzled frown. How clear Hempstead's voice sounded, even to the throat clearing which the AAT should have filtered from the message. He shifted his attention to the aux's surrealistic growth on the computer wall. Again, Hempstead's voice intruded. We expect from this transmission a more complete analysis of your damage. The nature and extent of the damage of paramount importance. Acknowledge at once. Project over and out. Bearing in mind that there's a hefty transition time from where they are to where Moonbase is, which they have at least acknowledged in the text. If it's from Saturn... Oh, I don't know what transmission time from Saturn is. I have no idea. I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't think I could figure it out. Thinking I have a smidgen of caffeine in my bloodstream at the moment, and that means I can't do math. I have learned this over many years the hard way. It's leaving now, but it's taking a while. Bickle kept his voice low, casual. Prue, how'd old Big Daddy sound to you? Worried, Prudence said, and she wondered why Bickle, with his inhibitions against return, could take this so calmly. If you wanted to convey the emotions in someone's message, how would you do it, Prue? Bickle asked. She looked at him, puzzled. I'd label the emotion or imitate the tone of the original. Why? The AAT isn't supposed to be able to do that, Bickle said. He looked up, meeting Flattery's eyes in the screen. Don't acknowledge that transmission, Raj. The AAT's working better than ever? Prudence asked. No, Bickle said. It's working in a way it shouldn't be able to. Oh, now it's becoming a large language model. It's literally making shit up. The laser burst message is stripped to... Oh, no, that's him talking. The laser burst message is stripped to bare essentials. The original voice modulations are there, theoretically, and often strong enough to recognize certain mannerisms, but subtleties are supposed to be beyond it. That last message was high fidelity. Oh, really? It's only an hour? Huh, I would have thought it was longer. Thank you for that, optical antenna. We appreciate it here. We like being informed and elucidated on. Whatever. Edumacated. There we go. The aux circuits make the system more sensitive, she said. Maybe, Bickle said. Was there nerve net activity accompanying that? Flattery asked. A fish has nerve net activity, Bickle said. Nerve net activity doesn't mean the thing's conscious. But sensitized the way consciousness is, Flattery said. Bickle nodded. Selective raising and lowering of thresholds, Flattery said. Threshold control. Again, Bickle nodded. What's this? Prudence asked. This thing, Bickle pointed to the ox, has just demonstrated threshold control, the way we do when we recognize something. He looked at her. When you lower your reception threshold, you spread the spatiotemporal message and project it across an internal recognition aura for mental comparison. The message is a spatiotemporal configuration which you superimpose on a recognition region. That recognition region can discriminate quite broadly between just right, which is maximum similarity, and a kind of blurring off you could call somewhat alike. Somewhat alike. Threshold control does the tuning for this kind of comparison. With precisely controlled motions, Bickle returned to the circuitry he had been working on when the UMB message interrupted him. He picked up a sheaf of fibers, noting the neuron tag on them, and slid the sheaf into a micromanipulator where he finished the connection to a multijack. In Comm Central, Flattery stretched out his left hand, gripped the stanchion beside his action couch until his knuckles went white. They were disobeying Hempstead in an outright, flagrant way. The chaplain psychiatrist had precise instructions about such a contingency. Obey. If others try to stop you, blow the ship. But he could feel how Bickle was closing in on the solution to the project's overriding problem. They were near a success. That certainly allowed a bit of latitude. Who can tell me what to do, O my soul? Who can tell me where my soul might be? The words of the 139th Psalm slithered through his mind. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Do we betray God by making something fearful and wonderful? He wondered. Our Father which art in heaven, he whispered. But I am in the heavens, he thought, and the heavens expose me still to spiritual risk. The sound of Bickle and Prudence working in the shop was almost a carrier wave for his thoughts. Faith and knowledge, he thought, and he sensed the eternal clash that now had taken his body as its arena, knowledge thrusting at the boundaries of faith. And he felt the constructive emotions his faith was engineered to contain. I could end this nonsense, he thought, but we are all in the same bind, and violence betrays us. Religion and psychiatry are but two branches of the healing art. He remembered the words clearly. The lecturer in Uses of Faith, the second-year course preparing him for this role. Religion and psychiatry share the same stem. Heal thyself, he thought. Tears started from his eyes. Where were the faith, the hope, and the laughter, the love and creativeness he had been enjoined to employ? Flattery looked up through his tears, saw in the screen both Bickle and Prudence ignoring him, so intent were they on the project. See how their hands touch, Flattery thought. He felt guilt at the sight and remembered Brooks's admonition. Keep clear of concealment, keep clear of the need of concealment. What an awful hour when we first meet the necessity of hiding something, he whispered. Please God, have I forgotten how to pray? Flattery ignored the vital console in front of him, closed his eyes, and gripped the stanchion fiercely. The Lord is my shepherd, he whispered. I shall not want. But the words had lost their power over him. There are no still waters here, or green pastures, he thought. There never had been these things for him. or for any of them out of the axolotl tanks and the UMB's sterile creches. There had only been the valley of the shadow of death. Do not broach this hatch without reading air pressure in the next passage. Every morning on his way to classes, 11 years, he had passed through the hatch with that warning. No travel beyond this point without full spacesuit. That omnipresent sign had set the boundaries on their untrammeled activity. It still did. The suit was like another social inhibition setting its own limits of behavior. It restricted your contact with other humans, reduced you to code tappings and depersonalized view phones, where every person became like a dancing doll on an oscilloscope screen. The omnipresent enemy was the outside, that total absence of the things to support life that emptiness called space. There probably should be a comma there. That total absence of the things to support life, that emptiness called space. It was evil, and they feared it. Constantly. A rod and staff might comfort in the presence of space, but what you dreamed about was washed air and a womb-like enclosed cell where you could divest yourself of the damnable suit. This was the true source of comfort, no matter if it came from the devil himself. The only table you could count on in the presence of this enemy was a squeeze bottle slid from its rack. Oil on the head could only fog a faceplate. You had to crop your hair short and keep down the natural oils with detergent. Goodness and mercy? That was anything which preserved the hope that you could one day walk unsuited beneath an open sky. I've lost my faith, Flattery thought. God, why have you taken my faith from me? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, he whispered. You were a fool, Matthew, he thought. A harlot can't regain her virginity. The whole universe is a matter of chemistry and mechanics, of matter and energy, he whispered. But only God was supposed to have complete control of manipulating the matter and energy. We aren't gods, Flattery thought. We're blaspheming by trying to make a machine that thinks of itself by itself. That is why I was set to watch over this mission. We blaspheme by trying to put a soul into a machine. I should go down there now and smash the whole thing. Raj! It was Bickle's voice booming from the intercom. Flattery looked up at the screen, his mouth suddenly dry. I'm getting independent action on the photosensory loops of the computer's record and store circuits, Bickle said. Prue, check the current drain. Normal, she said. It's no short circuit. It isn't conscious, Flattery said, his voice wooden. Agreed, Bickle said. But what the hell is it? The computer's programming itself in every... There came a charged moment of silence then. There came a charged moment of silence. Then, damn! What happened? Prue demanded. It stopped, Bickle said. What set it off? Flattery asked. I tied an inhibitor block to one arm of a single NerveNet simulator and sent a test pattern through it. The test evidently set up a resonant pattern that searched right through the aux and into the computer net via the monitor connections. That's when I started getting the self-programming reaction. Prudence sighted along her finger, moving it to trace a thick, color-coded connection that looped down from the aux. The monitor linkage goes only one way into record and store. It's buffered right there. Bickle pulled the connection she indicated. What are you doing? She asked. Disconnecting. I'm going to get the pattern of the experiment out of the memory banks and analyze it before proceeding. Silence. Flattery stared up at the screen with a deep sense of repugnance, which he knew was grounded in his religious training. It had been drummed into him. You are not precisely someone. You are a clone. There had always been too much emphasis on that statement for him to accept it completely. He understood the reasons for this conditioning, though, and accepted them. But what about this thing that Bickle's making? UMB had a complete bank of clones sufficient to recreate the Earthling's crew precisely as it had been at the moment of launching. Minor variables might intrude, and the organic mental cores could be different. He had never pinned that one down, but he knew it was cheaper to take OMCs from damaged humans than to clone them and prepare them for the ship. In a strange way, the OMCs might be more genetically human than the crew. Flattery knew he was not supposed to feel guilt at the thought of killing the ship, himself included. The message had been clear. We can recreate all of you here on the moon. You are infinite. You cannot completely die because your cells will live on and on. My exact cells? He wondered. My exact consciousness? But wasn't that the central problem of this whole project? What is consciousness? Again, he looked at the screen. If I kill the ship/computer/brain now, will I be killing someone? Also, hi, Frank Misers. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry I didn't mention it earlier. Chapter 24. Over a long period of time, clones offer us an extremely valuable tool for determining genetic drift. It is clear that our cloning techniques at UMB permit us to clone a clone indefinitely. 10,000 years from now, we could possess genetic material which is contemporary with this very moment, now. Perhaps this will be of greater service to humankind than the understanding of consciousness. Morgan Hempstead. Lectures at Moonbase. Routine sensor firings sent telltale lights flickering across the computer wall. The passage of the lights produced a weird shift in the shop's illumination. The curved bulkhead opposite the computer face reflected yellow, then green, now mauve, red. The color shift passed across a chart in Timberlake's hand as he read it, and compared the chart's predictions with the readings in front of him. The overhead screen showed Prudence on Comm Central about midway through her watch and Flattery dozing in his action couch. Strange you wouldn't take off for quarters, Timberlake thought. Bickle emerged from between the ox's two branchings just as a wash of green splashed down on him from the wall. That last reading's off only .008, Timberlake said. Insignificant, Bickle said. Waveforms? Timberlake nodded at the oscilloscope in front of him, feeling a sharp pain shoot through his neck. He felt tired and stiff. Bickle had driven them, working through 3 shifts. Timberlake rubbed his neck. Bickle turned from studying the scope. Remember I told you to remind me about all the oscillations involved in life? Rhythms, vibrations, just one great big series of drum beats. Yeah, Timberlake said. You about ready for the full-scale run-through? Bickle stared at the flickering lights, reluctant to move now that the moment of test had come. Bickle stared at the flickering lights, reluctant to move now that the moment of test had come. He knew the source of his reluctance, the secret thing he had done, and fear of its consequences. One more test, and then... what? Black box, white box. You think it's not going to work? Timberlake asked. He felt impatient with Bickle, but sensed this couldn't be pushed. The human nervous system, including the region of the brain we assume influences consciousness, has come through one hell of a lot of tests, Bickle said. And this thing, Timberlake nodded toward the ox, is a logically simple analog of the human brain. Logical simplicity has damn little bearing on our problem. We're engineering something all right, but not by the old bridge building rules. He's stalling, Timberlake thought. Why? Then what are we doing? It doesn't take much, just a word sometimes, to upset the logical apple cart,
Bickle said. The brains had to meet a lot of requirements that had nothing whatsoever to do with design simplicity. For one thing, it had to survive while it developed. Its size and shape had a bearing on that. It had to adapt existing structure to new functions.
Bickle met Timberlake's eyes.
The human brain's an obvious hybrid mating of function and structure. There are strengths in that, but weaknesses too.
So? Timberlake said and shrugged. What's upsetting the apple cart now?
Raj is talking about psychospace and psycho-relationships. That damn causal track of neuron impulses spreading out to form new kinds of space. It's quite possible for our normal universe to be twisted through an infinite number of psychospaces.
Yeah? Timberlake stared at him, wondering at the fear in Bickle's voice. Bickle went on.
There can be an infinite number of types of consciousness. Every time I come near turning this thing loose, I start wondering what space it'll inhabit.
Raj and his damn horror stories, Timberlake said. Bickle continued to stare at the ox structure, wondering if he had done the right thing to act secretly. Was this damn electronic maze going to create its own guilt? To reach a level where it could accept a black box imprint, the Oxcom computer had to surmount barriers, Bickle knew. It had to flex its mental muscles. And guilt was a barrier. By blank space programming, supplying data with obvious holes in it, he had inserted an information series on the subject of death. The online operative command was for the computer to fill in the gaps. Now, by parallel insertion of the address data for the life maintenance program on a cow embryo in the farm stock hive tanks, Bickle had provided the computer with a simple way to fill the gaps in its information. It could kill the embryo.
I had to act secretly, Bickle told himself. I couldn't ring in Timberlake, not with his inhibitions. And any of the others might have told Tim.
You think we're missing some fault in the system? Timberlake asked. What's bugging you? The fact that the random search stopped of its own accord?
No, Bickle shook his head. That search pattern ran into an irregularity, a threshold it couldn't cross.
Then what's holding you back, for Christ's sake?
Bickle swallowed.
He found it required increasing effort to hold his attention on an unbroken thread of reasoning where it concerned bringing the ox to consciousness. There was a sensation of swimming against a stiff current.
With what kind of a mirror can consciousness look at itself? He wondered. How can the ox say, "This is myself"? What will it see?
Human nervous systems have the same kinds of irregularities and imperfections, Timberlake said. Their properties vary statistically. Bickle nodded agreement. Timberlake was right. That was the reason they had introduced random error into the ox, statistical imperfection. You worrying about a pulse regulation? Timberlake asked. Bickle shook his head.
No.
He put his palm against a plastic-encased neuron block protruding from the ox.
We've got a homeostat whose main function is dealing with errors, with negative reality. Consciousness is always looking at the back side of whatever confronts us, always staring back at us.
You've left gaps in it so it'll need us, Timberlake said. You're fussed about threshold regulation.
Bickle looked at Timberlake, thinking. Threshold? Yes, that was part of it.
The brain cells and peripheral neurons in a human tied together so that their differences averaged out. You got the effect of smooth gradation. The effect, illusion.
We're missing something, Bickle muttered.
Timberlake wondered at the fear in Bickle's voice, the way the man's head turned from side to side like a caged animal.
If this thing takes off on its own, we have no control over it, Bickle said. Raj is right.
Raj's golem stories, Timberlake sneered.
No. Bickle was fearfully serious. This thing has new kinds of memories. They have only the vaguest relationship to human memories. But memories, Tim, The nerve gets stacked in psychospaces. They're the patterns that create behavior. What's this thing going to do when we turn it on? If we don't give it experiences of the kind of human race. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, nope. Very good. If we don't give it experiences of the kind the human race has survived. What's this thing going to do when we turn it on? If we don't give it the experiences of the kind the human race has survived. You don't know what the racial traumas are, and that's where you're hung up. Oh, you don't know what the racial traumas are, and that's where you're hung up. The voice was Flattery's, and they looked up to the overhead screen to see him sitting, still half cocooned in his action couch, and rubbing sleep from his eyes. Beyond him, Prudence maintained her vigil at the big board, as though that were the only thing concerning her. Bickle suppressed a feeling of irritation with Flattery. You're the psychiatrist. Isn't knowledge of trauma supposed to be one of your tools? You are asking about racial trauma, Flattery said. We can only guess at racial trauma. I mean, we can make some pretty good guesses. Slavery is probably not going to be high on one's list. Just idle speculation here. Flattery stared out of the screen at Bickle, thinking, John's panicky. Why, because the ox suddenly started acting on its own? We have to bring this thing into being, Bickle said, looking at the ox, but we can't be sure what it is. This is the ultimate stranger. It can't be like one of us. And if it's different, yet alive and aware of its aliveness, so you start casting around in your mind for ways to make it more like us, Flattery said. Bickle nodded. And you think we're the products of our racial and personal trauma? Flattery asked. You don't think consciousness is the apparent effect of a receptor? Damn it, Raj, Bickle snapped. We're within a short leap of solving this thing. Can't you feel that? But you wonder, Flattery said, are we making a creature that'll be invulnerable? At least invulnerable to us? Bickle swallowed. You think, Flattery went steadily on, this beast we're creating has no sexual function. It can't possibly be like us. It has no flesh. It can't possibly know what flesh fears and loves. So now you're asking, how do we simulate flesh and sex and the racial sufferings through which humans have blundered? The answer's obvious. We can't do this. We don't know all our own instincts. We can't sort out the shadows and reflections out of our history. We can sort out some of them, Bickle insisted. We have an instinct to win, to survive, for... He wet his lips with his tongue, looked around at the computer wall. Perhaps that's only hubris, Flattery said. Maybe this is just monkey curiosity, and we won't be satisfied until we've been creators the way God's a creator. But then it may be too late to turn back. As though he hadn't heard, Bickle said, and there's the killer instinct. That one goes right down into the slime where it was kill or be killed. You can see the other side of it all the time in our instinct to play it safe, to be practical. He has done something secret, Flattery thought. What has Bickle done? He has done something he's afraid of. And guilt feelings are grafted right onto that killer instinct, Bickle said. That's the buffer, the way we keep human behavior within limits. If we implant... Guilt involves sin, Flattery said. Where do you find in either religion or psychiatry a need for sin? Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the Abrahamic cosmology revolves around the concept. So I'm not sure what he means by that question. Instinct's just a word, Bickle said, and we're a long way from the word's source. What is it? We can raise 50 generations of chickens from embryo to chick in test tubes. They never see a shell. But the 51st generation, raised normally under a hen, still knows to peck its way out. Genetic imprint, Flattery said. Imprint. Bickle nodded. Something's stamped on us. Stamped hard. Oh, we know. We know these instincts without ever bringing them to consciousness. They're what lower our awareness, make us angry, violent, passionate. Again, he nodded. What has he done? Flattery asked himself. He's panicky because of it. I have to find out. The Cain and Abel syndrome, Bickle said. Murder and guilt. It's back there someplace, stamped inside us. The cells remember. You haven't the vaguest idea what you're saying, Flattery accused. You're separating positive and negative pairs, confusing moral judgments with reasoning, reversing the normal course of reversing, Bickle pounded. Maybe it's supposed to be pounced? That's what I was trying to think of. Yeah, it should be pounced. Reversing, Bickle pounced. That's what I was trying to think of. Reversing. The ability to turn pleasure into pain or pain into pleasure. That's a part of consciousness we haven't. That's sickness, Flattery said. The power to be sane is also the power to go mad, Bickle said. Your own words. Flattery stared out of the screen at him, caught up short by this turn of the argument, and a sudden suspicion about what Bickle could have done. You know, Timberlake said, speaking in a low, reasonable tone, if an instinct is something to which the whole system must refer in a moment of stress, that's something like a computer's trapping function mated to a supervisory program. We're beyond the point of engineering and have been for some time, Flattery said. Right back where we started from, Bickle agreed. We can duplicate synapses with unit junction transistors, juggle conduction rate and absolute refractory periods by choice of pseudo-neuron fibers, fit our neural networks with multiplying and inhibitory end bulbs at will, but in the end, we always come up against that inescapable question. How do you control what must remain beyond control? I've already told you. Love. You don't control it, Bickle declared. You merely aim it. And the aiming device has to be instincts. As you say, Raj, it must love us, be loyal to us. But does that mean it will worship us? Are we to be its gods? And if it's to be loyal, does that mean it has to have a conscience? Can there be loyalty without a conscience? And can it have a conscience without experiencing guilt? Guilt's a prison, Flattery protested. You can't imprison a free... Who says it has to be free? Bickle demanded. You're arguing against yourself. That's the whole idea. How do we control it? When you come right down to it, am I free? Are you? Flattery glared at him. We're instinct-ridden, conscience-ridden bits of protoplasm, Bickle said. What instincts? Flattery asked. You sound like a damn broken record, Bickle snapped. What instincts? You can't trace the instincts. Well, for one thing, we've an instinct to kill and eat. We don't really give one particle of a damn where we get our energy. Not down there in the psychic basement, we don't. If it were only that simple, Flattery said. When you get below stairs, it is, Bickle said. I don't need a doctorate in psychiatry to tell me what I'd do if the veneer were stripped off. You'd revert to the savage, eh? To the animal. To find out what's engineered into the system? You're damn right I would. What the hell have you head doctors been studying all these years with your dreams and your complexes and your Christ? You've trapped yourselves into an endless formal dance with fixed postures and... Christ, you remind me of a pack of fops doing the minuet. We've employed reverence and caution to approach God in man, Flattery said. You don't gouge into the human psyche with an egg beater and stir up all the hell you don't. They glared at each other, Bickle desperate with indecision, and Flattery's suspicions verging on certainty. He has given the Ox the means to kill, Flattery thought. His argument and his anger betray it. But kill what? Not one of us, certainly. A colonist in the hype tanks? No. One of the stock animals. He'd dip his toe into violence first, see if the ox could really do it. But he cannot have already made the black box, white box transfer. Prudence, dividing her attention between the control console and the clash of wills, felt herself shift further and further into a state of heightened awareness. She sensed Comm Central's minute temperature variations, heard the constant metallic creakings of deck and bulkheads around her, saw Flattery's growing suspicions and Bickle's desperate defensiveness, knew her own heartbeats and tiny variations in her body chemistry. It was the chemistry that fascinated her, the thought that all through this subtle play of organic and inorganic matter which she called myself, messages of which she was only dimly aware, if at all, were being transmitted and acted upon. The computer, with its enormous library of data culled from millions of minds, had offered her a way to explore the issue Bickle had raised, and she could not resist this. Where and how are the instincts carried? While the argument between Flattery and Bickle raged, she had translated the question into an edge-coded tape, shifted it into the computer section of her board, tripped the action switch. This went beyond chemical-based sequence, she knew, and into the area where knowledge of protein structure itself was only theoretical code. But if the computer gave her an answer that could be translated into a physical function, she knew she could explore the answer through experiments on her own body. "Bickle, what have you done?" Flattery demanded. Prudence looked up from her console, saw Flattery, his shoulders tensed as though about to leap, staring into the screen. The screen revealed Bickle and Timberlake, their backs turned, staring at the computer wall and the blocks and angles contortion that was the ox. The hum of the computer could be felt throughout the shop and Comm Central. The play of sensor and telltale lights across the big board and the shop's panels had reached a glittering tempo. Drain gauges showed energy consumption almost at the limits the system could tolerate. Chapter 25. There must be a threshold of consciousness such that when you pass it, you acquire godlike attributes. Raja Lawn Flattery, The Book of Ship. As though the computer display were a hypnotic trigger, all four of them waited it out with minimal reaction. Both Bickle and Flattery shared the same reason for inaction, fear that anything they did might be enough to destroy the entire system. Timberlake sat in sweating fear that his charges in hibernation were threatened by this computer display. Only Prudence was frozen by guilt. She found herself breathing in shallow gasps, acutely aware of every mechanical sound from the flashing display, every click and hum and buzz, every hissing tape, as though she had a direct sensory connection to the system. Abruptly, she put the back of her left hand over her mouth, horrified realization flooding her. The whole computer's routed through the ox now. "What have you done?" Flattery demanded. "Nothing," Bickle said without turning. Timberlake said, "Shouldn't we—" "Leave it alone," Bickle snapped. In a low voice, Prudence said, "I did it. I fed a question into the computer." "What question?" Bickle demanded. He pointed to a large meter above him. "Look at that current drain. I've never seen anything like it." I traced out 68 sequential steps of fourth-order biochemical configuration. I programmed it as a comparator of optical isomers for a first step in trying to detect where and how our instincts are imprinted on us. It's gone into the monitor banks, Bickle said, nodding at a new play of lights on the wall. We're getting multi-track reinforcement. Like a man concentrating on a tough problem, Timberlake said. Bickle nodded. The output beside Prudence began hissing as tape sped from it into the strip viewer. Bickle whirled. What are you getting? She studied the viewer, forcing calmness. A pyramided answer. I only asked for the first 4 probables. It's already into the 10th step. It's the nucleic acids, all right. Down there with the genetic information. But it's tracing out all the dead ends, the molecular weights, and... It's talking it over with you, Bickle said. It's asking your opinion. Cut in on it and eliminate the obvious dead ends as you see them. Prudence scanned back along the strip viewer, checked off useless sequences. Hydrogen catalysis? Obviously not. Too much opportunity for contamination. She cut into the output tape, began deleting and feeding the tape back into the computer. Output went suddenly silent, but the play of lights against the computer wall raised to a new frenzy. Power drain showed a new surge with a pulse in it. Are you feeding a resonant cycle into the system? Prudence asked. She was surprised at how much effort it took to hold her voice level. That pulse is identical to the timing of the Ox's response loops. As he spoke, the output beside Prudence renewed its chattering. Tape surged into the strip viewer. Prudence stared at it silently. Well, what is it? Bickle demanded. The output tape rolled to a stop. In the abrupt hush, Prudence said, It's linked to acid phosphatase, amino acid catalysis in the DNA coils. And as she made the functional comparison, relating this to her tests on her own body, adrenochrome, if she filled out the OH to C5H11N, would that take it through the blood-brain barrier at a less than fatal dosage? Is it conscious? Flattery whispered. Bickle looked up at the computer wall where lights were winking out, leaving only that somnolent play of telltales, green, mauve, gold. No, Bickle said. We've merely produced a computer that can program itself, concentrate all its bits of information on a problem, hunt for data even if that data comes from outside its banks. It knew when to ask a question of one of us. And isn't that conscious? Timberlake demanded. Not the way we are, Bickle said. You have to ask it a question before it comes to life. Acid phosphatase, Prudence mused. What do we know about acid phosphatase? She knew she was asking questions about the DNA language of life, questions pertinent to their consciousness problem. And she longed to confide in the others, discuss her experiments openly, but more than worry about the inhibitions of her companions. But more than worry about the inhibitions of her companions held her to silence. In some way she had gone too far down a road that she had to continue on, alone. Acid phosphatase is widely distributed in the body, Flattery said. He turned, looked at Prudence as though seeing her for the first time. She would understand, of course, almost at once. She looked up to the screen at Timberlake and Bickle. They might have to have it explained to them. He returned his attention to Prudence. How thin and tired she looked. Prudence nodded to herself, eyes glazed in thought. Body chemistry, yes, she said. Male prostates rich in acid phosphatase. Males store more of it than females. And she thought, testosterone. The male hormone's level in the body was directly related to position in a hierarchy. Bickle, oh, that's not a thought. Bickle would have the crew's highest T level. Flattery spoke cautiously. Body tissue requires a minimum level before a person can be awakened. She jerked upright, met his gaze. An enzyme involved in the physiology of sex and awakening. She turned away, thinking. Sex and awakening. Is that what anti-S suppresses? Bickle asked. Not directly, Timberlake answered. AS works primarily on serum phenosulfatase discrimination. It inhibits transfer and action. And action. Transfer and action. There we go. Timberlake, the life systems specialist, the biophysicist, would see it too, Flattery thought. Flattery looked into the screen, seeing Bickle standing there so silent and thoughtful, feeling a sudden pity for the man. Such a simple fact. Awakening and sex are tied together. Prudence kept her face turned toward the big control board, studied it without really seeing it. The ship could have gone into wild gyrations at the moment, and she would have been seconds responding. As she had looked at Flattery, she had seen what he was thinking as though there were words written on his forehead. Consciousness linked to reproduction. There was no doubt of it. Both came out of the same genetic well. History had washed them in the same waters, transferring the needs of one to the needs of the other. Slowly, Bickle turned, looked through the screen at the big laser-pulsed autolog in Com Central, recording the passage of Earth time. It recorded 18 weeks, 21 hours, and 29 seconds. It clicked over another minute as he watched it. For most of those pulse-counted minutes, Bickle thought, the Tin Eggs crew had been under the pressures of a ship in peril. The danger was real, no matter its source or intent. He had only to study the report on damage accretion to confirm this. But the pressure on the umbilicus crew had started with the loss of the organic mental cores. The pressure had started when they were no longer shielded by another consciousness. For the first time, Bickle turned his thoughts onto the concept of consciousness as a shield, a way of protecting its possessor from the shocks of the unknown. It was an "I can do anything" answer hurled at a universe that threatened you with everything. He lowered his attention to Flattery, who still sat half cocooned in the action couch, and Bickle sensed defeat in the curve of the man's shoulders and the set of his face. Why is he so quick to accept defeat? Bickle wondered. It's almost as though he wanted it. The answer came to him on the heels of the question. If you're programmed for destruction, you have a need for destruction. With a sense of growing awareness, Bickle turned to look at the Ox construction, focusing on the angles and blocks and the tangle of neuron connections. But I've programmed this beast for violence. Forcing himself to appear calm and natural, Bickle shifted the jackboard for a diagnostic check on the program, traced out the condition of the routine. His throat went dry as he scanned the readout. The embryo he had placed at the Ox's mercy. It was dead. No, dead was too simple a word for what had happened to that embryo. It had been disintegrated, torn asunder, broken down to its constituent molecules. The record was all here on the tapes and discs, betraying also the reason for the destruction. Prue's question. The embryo had been subjected to a violent experiment in the computer's search for information. A violent and useless experiment. This certainly could not have produced much data, except for some of the more grossly apparent characteristics of acid phosphatase, and perhaps negative data about other biochemistry. It'll kill to get information, Bickle thought. It has an ability of sorts to accept motivation, if we give it motivation. And optical antenna, you betcha. We are now cracking along.
I don't think I used this cover yet, and because we only have one more session after this, I figure I'll throw it in there now. I think it looks cool. Most of the covers for this look cool. The one for next week is very strange. It's very baffling. I'm not sure what was going on there. But this one's neat. Kind of gives me sarcophagus vibes. Or, Tutankhamun as drawn by H.R. Geiger. Giger? Giger, I think. Whatever. With, less sex organs floating around. Oh, sorry, gunk in my throat. Chapter 26. There's a trait called initiative, which is balanced against caution. Too tight a balance and you get oscillatory inaction, but that balancing act rides the wave of consciousness. All creatures display it in some form, but the sophisticated symbol-juggling form displayed by humans has to be related to the kind of consciousness answer we seek. Morgan Hempstead, Lectures at Moonbase. Prudence wiped perspiration from her cheek, returned her attention to the big board. For almost half an hour now she had been dividing her attention between the board and Bickle. It drained her. Bickle, working in the shop with Timberlake, obviously was caught in unspoken indecision, skirting all around it. Something had happened, something which Bickle refused to share with the rest of the crew. He went through the motions of refining that ox monstrosity, but something was making him fearful beyond any normal caution. A telltale on the board flickered into the red. "We've just lost another sensor," Prudence said, reading the telltale, "at 4CT B sub 5 K2. "Second pi, fourth ring in and behind number 5 shielding layer," Timberlake said. "That's damn close to the hype tanks." "I'll check it," Flattery said, unlocking the bottom of his couch. He swung his feet to the deck, slipped his helmet forward, but left it unsealed. "Is there a Robox R in that area?" Bickle asked. "What's the difference?" Flattery asked. "By the time we found one and traced out the control sequence—" "Are we going to check that sensor or aren't we?" Timberlake demanded. He glared into the screen at Flattery. "I'm on my way," Flattery said. "I mustn't let Tim preempt this job," he thought. "I need the excuse to go past quarters for a quick check on what Bickle's done. It's something violent and dangerous. He has himself under very thin control." "Raj," Prudence said. He turned at the hatch. "That thing down there in the shop could reproduce itself with no help from us. Every machine tool, every Robox monkey, every muscle and sensor is programmed through the computer. Once the last tie-in is made—" Flattery wet his lips with his tongue, ducked out through the hatch without answering her. "Why the hell did she bring that up now?" Bickle wondered. "That goddamn slowpoke," Timberlake said. "I should have gone myself." Prudence shifted a corner of her board to monitor Flattery's progress. She glanced up at the screen. Bickle was staring back past her at the hatch, where Flattery had gone. Raj was depressed at the thought of reproduction being linked to consciousness, Bickle thought. What Prudence told him should have lifted some of that depression. It didn't. A sense of foreboding poured through Bickle. Programmed for destruction equals a need for destruction, he thought. What am I afraid of? He wondered. What new thing? The fact that the ox could reproduce itself by using the tool tapes and mechanical muscles of the ship? "Prue, do you have a fix on Raj?" Bickle asked. "He has a prime repair, Dolly, and he'll be at the trouble spot in another minute or so," she said. "I ran a continuity check on the—" "No sense in that," Bickle said. "The trouble's in the sensor itself. The continuity net has hundreds of backups in alternate circuits. What failed, a heat sensor?" "Multiple," she said. "Heat, sound, visual." That thing's down near the temperature control shutters in the baffle to the hype tanks."
Timberlake muttered. Too goddamn close to them. You getting any heat shifts on the other sensors?
Nothing significant, she said.
Prudence flicked a switch, watching the shifting factors of the temperature, weight, sound on her board, the telltales moving with flattery. She hit another switch.
Raj, how much longer?
Flattery's voice came out of the overhead command vocoder. Another minute or so. They waited in silence, listening to the sounds of Flattery's progress through the open command vocoder. Prudence activated a guide beam to the dead sensor as Flattery passed the water baffles.
Baffles secure, she said, reading her board.
All secure, Flattery said. He dogged that last hatch, knowing the action would register in front of Prudence in Comm Central. The action sent a faint fear response through him. He had symbolically cut himself off from the core of the ship. I'll fix this sensor and get back to quarters as soon as I can, he told himself. It'll seem natural for me to stop off there on my way back. I have to find out what Bickle's done, but I can't make him suspicious. Flattery turned, studied his surroundings. He stood in the bulb lock that served as a hub for outer hull communications tubes in that sector. In this sector. It was an oval for strength, about 6 meters across its short diameter and 7 meters deep. He oriented himself by the faint pull of ship gravity. The non-functioning sensor was up a tube that curved off at 2 o'clock on his right. Tube 8, ring K. The number checked. The failure would be at the 5 line. He stared into the pale gray metal gap illuminated by cold light. A green guide beam beckoned in the tube. Prue, remember to set the guide beam, he thought. He took the repair dolly in his left hand, made the low-grav leap across to the tube, and caught its access rung. He pushed the dolly in ahead of him, setting its sensors on the printed track, fed it low power to pull him into the tube. The autolock's sphincter closed behind him. He suddenly remembered Anderson strangled in a rogue sphincter, but of course that was no problem now, with all of the OMCs dead. The fact that one of the crew had to come out here and make this repair meant the dangers were of another sort.
Something wrong?
Prudence asked, her voice filling his helmet. She saw the telltales stop here, Flattery thought. It gave him a feeling of reassurance that she was so alert to his movements. Or lack of movements. Nothing wrong, just being cautious.
You want Tim to come out and back you up? Prudence asked.
I don't need anyone to hold my hand, Flattery snapped, and he wondered at the sudden anger he'd thrown into that rejection.
You're at Station 2, Prudence said. There's video on 2. Check.
Flattery glanced up at the ring of sensors on the tube, saw the one circled with yellow for video, waved at it as he passed. The Robox R's imprinted track curved up the tube's side to clear the base bulge for the next automatic lock. He went through, looked back as the transparent shutters squeezed closed behind him. The ship's core felt so far away back there. He looked forward, letting the Robox unit tow him with its faint, hissing growl, letting the loneliness seep through him. With an OMC in control, an automatic Robox repair unit could have been sent on this little chore. Mobility, that was the problem. Where there were fixed automatic repair units, along the outer hull and at the major bulkhead locks, at the baffles and core integrity barriers, the ship took care of itself with only a little help from its crew. But let a little thing like this come up, where you needed mobility and a decision factor, then one of the crew had to risk himself. Flattery cursed the Tin Eggs designers then. Hate poured out of him. He knew why they had done this. The planned increment of frustration, they called it. That was fine, as long as one of the ship's designers didn't have to experience the frustration, or the deadliness. He was at Station 4 now, coming up on 5. Station 5 coming up, he said. Hey! He cut the power on the Robox.
braked himself against the station's ring, stared up at the overhead arc of sensors. A neat, shiny hole plugged with gray foam coagulant occupied the position where the multi-sensor had been. The yellow, green, red code rings on the tube around the hole had not been touched. He swung his head around the tube and the other sensors. All appeared to be functioning. Flattery thought then of the island on Puget Sound. Sensors missing mysteriously. Personnel missing. He felt cold sweat around his shoulders. Prudence's voice filled his helmet. "Anything to report?" He lowered the volume. "The multi-sensor appears to have been cut out in some way. It's gone. The hole's been plugged with foam." "No foam automatics in that area," Prudence said. "This thing's been plugged with foam anyway." Flattery was unable to hide the angry irritation in his voice. Oh, 1 sec. Prudence suddenly said, "John, I'm getting a demand drain on the computer. Is it something you're doing?" "Nothing," Bickle said. Flattery turned his head in the helmet. Bickle's voice had come in faintly as a pickup through Comm Central. Action in the computer. Flattery forced himself to act calmly, removed a replacement sensor from his Robox unit's parts compartment, checked it. The thing was about 3 inches in diameter, containing a warp-type thermal detector, standard vid-eye pickups like tiny jewels on its face, and 3 gridded ducts leading into the membrane of the audio unit. Out of the corner of one eye, Flattery detected movement up the tube. He jerked upright, banged his head against the helmet liner, stared up towards Station 6. A Robox R unit, with its tool extensors clamped tightly to its sides, was moving along the tape track toward him. The thing acted sick, speeding and slowing. His first thought was that Prudence had traced the Robox remote controls for a unit in this area and was maneuvering the thing from her board. The crudity of Comm Central's controls over the Robox series would account for the unit's erratic behavior. "You bringing another Robox in here, Prue?" Flattery asked. "No. Why?" "There's another Robox R coming down on this station," he said. As he watched, the thing lost the tape track, relocated it. "There can't be. Nothing at all shows on my board." The thing stopped across the sensor ring from Flattery. An auger extension jerked away from its side, withdrew toward the foam-plugged hole, withdrew. An auger extension jerked away from its side, reached toward the foam-plugged hole, withdrew. "Who's controlling that thing?" Flattery demanded. "Not from here," Prudence said, "and I can see both Tim and John. They're not controlling it." "You still getting drain on the computer?" Flattery whispered. "Yes." "Is the aux active?" Flattery asked. "Only the original circuits," Bickle said. "Through the AAT bypass. The new doubled units haven't been connected." "There can't be another Robox in that area," Prudence insisted. "We haven't put any of the damn things on automatic. There's nothing showing on my board. The remotes would take a day and a half at least to—" "It's right in front of me," Flattery said. He watched it, fascinated. A tool arm extended with an empty sensor socket, reached toward the foam-plugged hole, retreated. A claw arm came up next. It probed the foam, drew back with a swiftness that startled Flattery. "What's it doing?" Prudence asked. "I'm not sure. It seems to be looking over the damage. Its vid-eyes are turned toward the hole. It acts like it can't decide which tool to use." "What can't decide?" That was Timberlake, his voice faint over the Comm Central relay from the shop. "Try fixing the sensor yourself," Bickle said. Flattery swallowed in a dry throat. He lifted a feeler with a guide eye from the tool pouch in his own robox, probed it into the foam plug, looking for the leads from the conduit. Instantly, a whip-like extension shot out of the other robox, trapped his arm, jerked it away. The pain in his arm where the thing had clamped on it was sharp and shocking. He dropped the tool, yelled. "What's wrong?" Prudence demanded. The whip-like extension slowly unwound, released his arm. "The thing grabbed me," Flattery said. His voice was shaky with pain and surprise. "It used its circuit probe, grabbed my arm." "It won't let you make the repair?" That was Bickle, his voice coming in loud over the helmet system, indicating he'd plugged into the command circuit from the shop. "Doesn't look like it," Flattery said, and he wondered, why doesn't one of us say what this thing has to be? Why we're avoiding the obvious? With an abrupt sense of purpose, the other robox reached out a claw arm, lifted the replacement sensor from Flattery's left hand, matched sensor and socket. Another claw arm recovered the feeler guide, fitted it to the connections of its own circuit probe. "What's it doing now?" Bickle asked. "Making the repair itself," Flattery said. The feeler came out of the hole, pulling the leads. "John, what's showing on your meters?" Prudence asked. "A slight pulse from the servo banks," Bickle answered. "Very faint. It's like the cycling echo of a test pulse. Are you still showing current drain in there? I don't have it in here." "Drain from the mains into the computer. You should be registering it." "Negative," Bickle said. It just fitted the new socket and sensor into the hole," Flattery said. "It brought the correct spare parts?" Bickle asked. "It took the sensor I brought," Flattery said. "It just took it from you?" Prudence asked. "That's right." "Prue, that test pulse is stronger," Bickle said. "Are you sure nothing on your board is doing it?" She scanned her console. "Nothing." "Job's finished," Flattery said. "What's the big board show, Prue?" "Sensor in service," she said. "I can see you and it." "Try touching that new sensor, Raj," Bickle said. "Poke it with a stick." "That thing damn near took my arm out the last time I tried that," Flattery objected. "Use a tool," Bickle said. "Something long. You've got a telescoping radiation probe there." Flattery looked into his robox unit, removed the telescoping probe. He extended it to its limit, reached toward the sensor, touched it. The whip arm flashed out of the other robox. There came a jolting shock, and Flattery stared wide-eyed at the stump of the probe in his hand. The severed end drifted along the tube, tumbling from the force of the blow. "Christ!" That was Timberlake, proving they had the shop's screen switched to this circuit, and were watching. Flattery swallowed, spoke in a muffled voice. "If that had been my arm—" He stared at the other robox. It sat there, quiescent, its vid-eyes pointed toward him. "We're playing with fire," Flattery thought. "We don't know what's guiding that robox. It could be a repair program we've accidentally activated. It could be something the Tin Eggs designers built into the ship." "You'd better get out of there, Raj," Prudence said. "No, wait," Bickle said. "Raj, don't move. You hear me?" "I hear you," Flattery said. He stared at the robox, realizing the thing could cut him in half with one blow from that whipping circuit probe. The sound of distant activity came through the helmet phones to Flattery. "I should have the full computer showing here," Bickle said, "but I can't find that damn robox anywhere on my board. There's not even pulse resonance in any of the loops to hint at the source of control." "I can't stay out here forever." "I can't stay out here forever," Flattery whispered. "What's showing on the meters, Prue?" Bickle asked. "Still getting computer drain, and that pulse."
Raj has been outside the shields for 16 minutes, Timberlake said. Prue, what's the radiation tolerance level for his area? She crossed the comparison lines against the time gauge on her main board scope, read the difference. He should be back inside the shield lock within 38 minutes. Movement up the tube caught Flattery's attention. The end of the radiation probe. It had reached the top of its energy curve, was beginning to fall back down toward the grav center in the core of the ship. As the severed end of the tool neared the other row box, the tip of one of its sensor arms, just the tip, turned to track the passage. That minimal activity, that watchfulness, filled Flattery with greater dread than if the robox had attacked the length of the tool and torn it apart. There was a sense of waiting about the thing, of waiting and gathering information. Raj, it was Bickle's voice. Yes? Is there any information in the computer, even a hint, that you might destroy it? Did he send me out here to trap me into answering that question? Flattery asked himself. But the fear in Bickle's voice ruled out that suggestion. Why? Flattery asked. Bickle cleared his throat, told about the programmed violence against the cow embryo and the destructive experiment. It was programmed to fill in the blanks in its information, Raj, and I put no limiting factor on that. The violence proves it'll stop at nothing to maintain its own integrity. If you pose any threat at all... You're saying it's conscious? Prue asked. Not the way we're conscious, Bickle said. Like an animal, aware, and with at least one drive we can recognize, self-preservation. Raj, answer the question, Prudence said. She knows the answer, Flattery thought. He could hear the awareness in her voice. Why doesn't she answer it for me? The computer may well have such information in it, Flattery said. And he thought, I'm trapped. I must get back to quarters, destroy this thing. It's already out of hand. But if I move, it'll kill me. He stared at the robox. There was the thing that gave the computer mobility. The thousands of special function utility robox units throughout the ship, even the one under his hands. If it were shifted to automatic and keyed for program control, and if a consciousness directed it. These were what gave the Ox-Cum computer its gonads and ovaries. These and the computer-linked tools. Would it react with violence if Raj tried to move? Prudence asked. Silence. What about it, Bick? Timberlake asked. Very likely, Bickle said. You saw the violence it used when he tried to touch that sensor. What would you do if someone poked a finger in your eye? Timberlake asked. It's approaching me. Oh, it's approaching me, Flattery said, and he felt a flicker of pride at how calm his voice sounded. Stay put, Bickle said. Tim, take a cutting torch and... I'm on my way, Timberlake said. Raj, I think your only hope's to play dead. Remain absolutely still, Bickle said. A sensor tip was in front of Flattery's eyes now, and he found himself staring for a second into a baleful red and yellow glow. The tip retracted, and the robox backed off half a meter, clearing the repair unit by a hair. Let go of your own robox, Bickle whispered. Flattery saw his own knuckles, white with the force of their grip on the robox control bar. He relaxed the hand. Gravity will set you drifting presently back down the tube, Bickle whispered. Just let it happen. Stay limp. The motion was barely perceptible at first. The locks are part of the central system. That was Prue's voice. What if they don't... She didn't finish the question, but it was obvious she, too, remembered how the rogue sphincter lock had crushed the life out of Anderson. I mean, she wasn't there for that, but she probably got an after-action report. Anyway, now Flattery could see he definitely was drifting back. The two robox units receded up the tube, and that sensor tip remained pointed at him. The first lock passed his eyes. It had opened.
but the lock's transparent leaves remained open after his passage, and that ambulant robox was following, hesitantly at first, then faster. The AAT klaxon blared in Flattery's helmet, transmitted through the open net from Com Central.
Oh, Jesus!
That was Prudence. Was the transceiver open? That was Bickle.
The message is already into the system, Prudence said. We left it on automatic.
Tim, where are you? Bickle asked.
At the hub lock, Timberlake said.
Take the message, Prue, Bickle said. Visio. Relays clicked as she shunted the AAT to Com Central. Presently, she said,
Short and sweet. Hempstead tells us to cease ignoring communications. We are ordered to turn back and make no mistake about it. Odd choice of words. This is an arbitrary turn-back command.
He knows what he can do with his arbitrary turn-back command, Bickle said. At the sound of Prudence's voice, Flattery had gone cold. The chill of ice water gripped his chest. Arbitrary turn-back command. It was the coded order he had both dreaded and almost longed for. The kill ship command. That's basically the perfect dramatic point to leave it. I'm just flipping through the next chapter to see if I can justify doing that. Yeah, we're going to leave it there. I do have some stuff I have to get done. But in any case, how long is the epilogue? The epilogue's short. We're not going to worry about it. Next week will be the final installment of Destination Void. Um, things are kicking into gear in a big way. You'll notice the pacing is pretty comparable in a lot of ways to Under Pressure or Dragon Under the Sea, right down to somebody having to do a maintenance work. Um, I'm not sure if it's coincidence or not. I did Under Pressure because I love it as a self-contained story. Destination Void also works quite well as a destination story, as a self-contained story. I feel, but it happens to have some follow-up sequels that, wow, they like things are wild. Like when we hit the ending of this, it's pretty nuts, and then the Jesus incident is just like, wait a minute, wow, where are we going? What are we doing? I can't believe someone went this far with the idea. It's brilliant. It's a great series. I'm glad that somebody, I forget who, asked for it to be done, requested it. I'm very glad they did because it's a great one. It's lesser known of Herbert's work, which is criminal because it's quite good. Um, yeah. So with that, yeah, next week we will finish Destination Void. Next week we will also finish Termouche on Wednesday. And we'll be at about the halfway point on armor. Then I am gone for, and that'll be on Monday. I am gone after that for at least a week, probably two. Um, but then we'll be back and we will read more armor. We will move on to The Three Body Problem by Xixin Liu. And I have no idea what I'll do for Wednesdays. I'll figure it out. At this point, I'm thinking, well, I could do the next book in the Legend of the Condor Heroes. Legends of the Condor Heroes. I could do that. Either that or maybe Bear v Shark. Bear v Shark was
was an interesting exercise for anyone who likes a certain kind of bleak satire. You'll understand what I mean when we get there. I think one of the biggest takeaways I had from it is I couldn't believe it was only written. I couldn't believe it was written as far back as 2001. I was like, yeah, no, he called it. There's some artifacts there that are, okay, yeah, definitely this was written before a certain time period, but so much of it is, uh, we'll see. Might do that. Anyway, that'll do it for me. I got to run. To everybody who tuned in, thank you. Thank you muchly. Hopefully people enjoyed. I certainly did. It's a great book. It's a lot of fun. Frank Herbert's a lot of fun in general. He's not the easiest author to read aloud, but he is still quite fun to read aloud. I think he's just a fun author to read in general. I do want to do some of his shorter stories. Like I'd love to do what's that one called? Whipping Star, and there's kind of a follow-up to that. Was it the Dosati experiment? Dosati? However that's pronounced. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the follow-up. Uses some of the same setting and characters. Um, I do want to do that at some point. Did I do Hellstrom's Hive? I don't think I did. I know I thought about it. Hellstrom's Hive is interesting. The White Plague is also interesting, but it's uh, there's um, there's definitely some stuff that I think people would have some qualms with. I know I do. There's some thoughts and ideas in there where I'm like, well, on one hand, the world is burning and somebody's sending a truck to deal with it, and it's very loud. On the other hand, it makes sense based on their world situation that yeah, this is arguably a reasonable solution to their problems, but that we got to this point in the first place is horrifying in its own way. It makes sense if you have read it. That we may or we may not. Other stuff I want to read. Geez. At some point, I would like to get around to Endymion by Dan Simmons, but that is farther back on the priority list. Right now, the main meat of what I'm going to be doing is for the foreseeable is alternating between the three-body problem and the rest of the Pandora sequence, the three-body problem trilogy, and the rest of the Pandora sequence. For Mondays, I think my agreed upon, yeah, what I was planning on doing was after we finish Armor, we go to All You Need Is Kill by Sakurazawa. I don't remember his other name. And after that, probably do most of the Full Metal Panic light novel series. To anyone who's seen the animated series or read the manga or anything, things go pretty crazy towards the end. So when we get there, I'll say, hey, by the way, spoilers. Spoilers for how nuts things are going to get if they ever animate the last portion of that franchise, which I suspect will happen at some point. I don't know. Um, big gaps between installments of that, animated installments for that, which is kind of crazy. Uh, I might fit in Yukikaze or Good Luck Yukikaze at some point in there if I continue to do reading for Mecha Mondays. I don't know. It's definitely an experiment for this year, and then see if I would keep doing it. I might alternate. I don't know. Um, anyway, I'm gonna go. To anyone who is listening to this after the fact and is wondering why it sounds so rough, it's because I'm doing this live, raw, unfiltered, and uncut every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting at 12 noon U.S. East Coast time, or UTC minus 5, 12 noon. So whatever time zone that translates to you, you can tune in. I realize it's not an ideal time frame for just about anyone, but it's the time slot I have available. It works out well for anyone listening to it on their lunch break, basically. which works. And of course, it's all up there on the YouTube channel that I've got there. If you're listening to this via Twitch, it should be in the stream description. I update the playlists about every month. That's something I'm going to have to remind myself to do next week, is get that up to date, because goodness knows there's going to be a bunch. I'm going to have to make a bunch of new playlists. I got to do the one for Beowulf, I think, and I definitely have to do the one for Termouche. And I think I have to make the one for Armor as well. Whatever, we'll take care of it. Anyway, thanks again to everyone who tuned in, and if you're tuning in after the fact, hey, thanks for tuning in. Enjoy. If you don't enjoy, leave feedback. If you like, I don't care that there are people who didn't like how I did the Area X trilogy. That reminds me, I need to remember that he's coming out with the fourth book of that in October. What was that one called? What was that called? Jeff Vandermeer, let's see. Wow. That paperback for the whole trilogy is going for $40? I know I didn't spend that much. Mine's a hardcover, too. Absolution will be the next one. I gotta remember to snag a copy of that. Because I have needs. I have needs. Yeah. And we'll get to that sometime after I've finished reading it. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the read of the Area X trilogy. I enjoyed reading it. I think that no matter how it went better than my reading of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. That one is... Wow, the audio CD for Absolution when it comes out is going to be $47? What is going on? Why? Why? Why is it more expensive than the book? How does that make any sense? What? Maybe they have like a professional voice acting cast? That might explain it. Let me see. Do they say? That'd be neat. Okay, it's an MP3 CD, so it's not in a lossless format. Do you have a list of voice actors and readers? Blackstone Publishing. It's 1 page long. It's a 1-page audio CD. How does it weigh 1 pound? How? How does it weigh a pound? How? How is that even possible? It's a CD. How many CDs is it? Oh, never mind. I'll stop. There's no way. That's more expensive than, like, the last several CD purchases I've made combined. What? And why is it double the price of the hardcover? I have no idea. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, man. Geez, maybe I should actually do this professionally because, okay, admittedly, whoever the production house is getting all that money, and then only a percent of that is going to the people who actually read it aloud. But damn, why is it so expensive? I confuse. Anyway, back on track. Right, where was I? I'm really scatterbrained today. It's the caffeine. I don't normally. You can usually tell when I do. Must be the microphone. That's probably it. Someday I probably will get a better microphone. I'm just using it's not a terribly cheap headset, but it's a headset. But improving my audio quality would be nice. It'll be a jarring thing. If I do it, it'll be like the start of next year, probably. I love the cover for Absolution, though. That's great. Can I get a... Anyway, well, we'll get that cover when it comes time. We won't be getting to reading that on stream until I'm done, at the very earliest, when I'm done reading through the three-body trilogy and the Pandora sequence. But we will get to it.
It's on the list.
But yeah, thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in after the fact. This is an artifact from the past. Much like, what did I use as my stream descriptor? Oh, yes, the Greg Haljan quote from Brigands of the Moon. My narrative lies now in this permanently recorded form before you, and I prepare my exit bow with the humble hope that I may have given you pleasure. If so, I do beg you to tell me of it. There are some who have already flashed their approval of my discs. I thank them most earnestly and gratefully. Which, when I saw that at the end of reading that, it was serialized in, I think, Astounding Science Fiction. I can't remember now. But it's a Brigands of the Moon, an old pulp serialized pulp novel. Um, that I read through. And that quote was at the end of it, and it was like, it's perfect. It's literally me. It's literally what I'm doing. So I include it in all the stream descriptions now, because obviously. So if you want to tell me about it, that's great. I'm not going to tell you to like, subscribe, or any of that nonsense. If you do, fine. That's as ever. I'm not doing this to make money. It's not. It's not going to happen. I will probably get something like I don't know, Patreon or something up. If people want to throw money there, they can, but I'm not gonna push for it. I am gainfully employed, thank you very much. So this is a hobby. I do this for the fun of it. That other people are enjoying it too is even better. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna dip. See you all next week. Have fun, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Unlike we fear the aux unit / white black box white box might be doing. Not like that poor cow embryo. Rest in atomized constituent molecules, cow embryo. Goodbye. Toodles!